Overnight, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and President Trump both confirming that Zelenskyy will travel to the White House on Monday for an Oval Office meeting. The two leaders held lengthy phone calls late last night following the historic summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, Zelenskyy says he received positive signals from the U.S. on guaranteeing security for the country.
That's right, and it comes after Trump and Putin met in Alaska yesterday for a very rare face-to-face negotiation. The president describing the high-stakes meeting with Putin as a 10, and then posting to Truth Social this morning saying, quote, "It was determined by all that the best way to end the horrific war between Russia and Ukraine is to go directly to a peace agreement and not a mere ceasefire agreement, which oftentimes do not hold up."
Joining us with the latest on the summit is Rebekah Castor. She's live from Washington with the details. Good morning, Rebekah.
Charlie, good morning. For now, Trump is sharing very little details on what he discussed with Putin to not disrupt the deal as he's making it. It all started yesterday with B-2 bombers and fighter jets flying over the world leaders on the tarmac in Alaska, an opportunity for the U.S. to show off our military strength. Putin and President Trump met for about 3 hours and say many details regarding Ukraine were agreed to, but they're not there yet. Putin did, however, make this stunning admission.
Today, when President Trump saying that if he was the president back then, there will be no war. And I'm quite sure that it would indeed be so. I can confirm that. I think that overall, me and President Trump have built a very good, businesslike and trustworthy contact.
Then President Trump then responded to Putin's confession.
I was very happy to hear him say if I was president, that war would have never happened. I see everyone saying worst since World War II by far. There's nothing even close. But we had a very good meeting today, and I think a lot of points were negotiated.
Putin's profession comes as Trump tells Fox's Bret Baier that Chinese President Xi Jinping assured him that he wouldn't invade Taiwan during his term. Even though a Ukraine peace deal hasn't been reached yet, some lawmakers are already advocating for Trump to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. Congressman Andy Ogles writing, "Today President Trump did what no leader could, brought Russia and the U.S. back to the table. From the Abraham Accords to North Korea, his record is peace through strength. I'm drafting his Nobel Peace Prize nomination now. Stay tuned." And we'll stay tuned to see if Trump can get this to the finish line. Back to you guys.
Thank you, Rebekah.
Thanks, Rebekah.
Truly historic, extraordinary day yesterday. And I have to say that, President Putin arriving in Alaska, the first Russian president to ever visit Alaska, which is kind of extraordinary considering the history of that spot of land between the United States and Russia, which is only miles away from Russia, in fact. And for him to land there in a moment from what you're seeing on the screen right there, as they're about to mount the stage, is when that B-2 bomber with the F-35s come roaring over. And you have to think there was a moment there where Putin was wondering, okay, wait, what is about to happen?
Right. Well, you also can imagine that President Trump, who is very aware of how things look.
Yeah.
He's a producer at heart.
Yes.
And so you mentioned, the bombers coming over, looking at that right now. But also the first thing I noticed was, one, President Trump made Putin walk towards him, okay? And then President Trump had this giant red carpet, and Putin had this tiny little strip to walk down. Did you notice that? You had to know that President Trump said, make sure my red carpet is much bigger than his red carpet. And that was something to notice as well. But listen, he said the meeting was warm. He gave it a 10. And by the way, he mentioned also how hot our country is multiple times in all of this, and then said, listen, this is now up to Zelenskyy to get it done.
Yeah, and when President Trump, obviously, he sat down with Sean Hannity and talked about this pretty much at length. I was on standby for the show, so I got to see it almost in real time. And the one thing about it is President Trump came into that interview with energy. He came into it seemingly optimistic, of course, cautiously optimistic. But this is just one part of the interview, what he told Sean Hannity about, America and Russia moving forward.
I always had a great relationship with President Putin, and we would have done great things together in terms of, their land is incredible. The rare earth, the oil, gas, everything, it's incredible. It's the largest piece of land in the world. This war should never have happened. A lot of wars should never have happened. He drove China and Russia together. That's not good. If you are just a minor student of history, it's the one thing you didn't want to do, because they're basically natural enemies. Russia has tremendous amounts of land. China has tremendous amounts of people. And China needs Russia land. But because of pure stupidity, they were driven together.
Okay, so I love in this interview that immediately President Trump starts talking about the elephant in the room, which is China.
Yeah.
The real enemy of America in this situation, and the irony that this war has brought these two together. But before we dissect the China part, which I think is eminently important, let's talk about the fact that this interview with Sean Hannity, our own Sean Hannity, happened minutes after this
in the
meeting.
same room.
In the same
exact
room.
Same spot.
Think about the lack of transparency and sort of just press conferences and everything else from the last administration. Here we have President Trump almost opening us up into this entire situation, giving us full access until they get in the meeting, then minutes after talking with Sean Hannity and breaking down what happened as much as was possible without blowing up the deal. In fact, Charlie, at one point he said, I really shouldn't have had this interview with you. And Sean's like, I've never had an interview where the person says, I shouldn't have had an interview with you. But that's the kind of openness and transparency that America's craving. And I think it makes for better negotiations. You've got to believe that Putin saw that President Trump is the same person in that meeting as he is on Sean Hannity. And that's how you begin to build trust.
Yeah, and of course, the left predictably freaked out because one of the things that Vladimir Putin said in his statement during this, it wasn't a press conference, it was more of a press lecture, was that the war never would have happened had it not been for President Biden. And, obviously, Putin was obviously saying something that Donald Trump has said many times before. And the leftist Democrats who are upset about this peace effort, I think, are arguing that somehow Donald Trump is getting played. I don't think Donald Trump is getting played by that. Obviously, two things can be true. Putin can say the thing that Donald Trump has said 1,000,000 times, invented, but it doesn't mean that Donald Trump isn't still negotiating on behalf of the United States of America and on behalf of peace. And it also doesn't mean that they're not both right about it, that Joe Biden's mishandling of the whole situation allowed this to happen.
Absolutely, that's true. I mean, so what are they mad about? They're mad that Putin's telling the truth. What we all saw was so obvious, that the situation in Afghanistan and the fact that Kamala Harris basically offered entry into NATO to Zelenskyy. All of those things together, all done by the Joe Biden's administration, helped precipitate this war.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.